Hello, I'm Nicole Sorrell, and today's Couch Conversation is looking at how psychological safety and trust impacts the bottom line. It's a real privilege to be talking to Teresa Mitrovic and Egbe Adeoye. Thank you so much for being here. So Teresa comes from a corporate background in a senior executive role, both at Disney for many years and then Universal Pictures. She then saw the light and transferred over to become a coach and international consultant. And she's really a specialist in this area of trust and psychological safety. She has a fantastic book that I highly recommend called The Currency of Connection: How Trust Transforms Life, Relationships and Work. Thanks for being here, Teresa. And Egbe also comes from a very corporate background, 16 years leadership position and talent at BP, and then at Schneider Electric. And then also did that beautiful transfer over to become a qualified coach and international consultant. And I love what Egbe's saying around her work is that she likes to leave people, process and systems better than how she found them. So it's a real privilege to work with both of you, or to have a conversation with both of you today. Thank you.
Thanks,
So
Nicole.
we're going to start off by, I'm going to ask Egbe first a question, and then we'll go across to Teresa. So let's just define the terms we're looking at today. So the big question is how psychological safety and trust impacts the bottom line. So what is it, what do we mean by psychological safety and trust, and what's the potential link in your perspective between the two?
So I always think we can be very wordy about it, but if you think about how do I know when this place is psychologically safe, it's when I feel that I can come and do my best work, and I can also fail without feeling that there'll be this huge judgment or repercussion against me. And it's as simple as that. Psychological safety is something that's felt more than it's said. And it takes intentional acts by everyone around to create that environment. So when I'm in this space where I feel like it's okay to fail, and it's okay to learn, and it's okay just to bring myself and do my best, then I'm in a space that's psychologically safe. So, and when I'm in that space and I trust that others can be in that space as well and are doing the same, bringing their best selves and being open to learning from things that don't happen well as things that happen well, actually, then as a system, we're in a psychologically safe system, and that can only help the bottom line. And when you think about it from an agile working perspective, it means that we can call quickly to say, hey, this isn't going right, let's shift. And we can also say, hey, look how really great we did here, and let's celebrate that as well. So in a nutshell, I think that's what psychologically safe environments feel like when we're in them. Yeah.
Oh, beautiful. Thank you.
Amazing.
Teresa, what's your view?
So I think Egbe just nailed that, absolutely. And one of the things I loved about what you said, Egbe, was you said it's a felt experience. And that is so true, right? And I think one of the things that really stands out for me is we talk about psychological safety and trust quite a lot, and we get the two confused quite a bit. But psychological safety, so the way that I look at it as psychological safety is our own internal assessment of whether we're safe, whether we feel safe enough, whether we judge the environment and the relationships that we have around us to feel safe enough for us to actually become vulnerable in those environments. And as Egbe says, psychological safety is core to agile working environments, but actually all working environments, particularly now when we aren't all always together, or when we have to suddenly work remote because we're in isolation or looking after others. So if you don't have that psychological safety, then what you're losing is people's capacity to be vulnerable and to show up with everything that they have. And one of the things that you see when you look at the research on psychological safety and performance is that psychological safety is a precondition for performance, and because it enables learning, because you cannot learn if you cannot be safely vulnerable. So it's kind of, so the impact that psych safety has on the bottom line is you get all of someone's energy and all of someone's engagement. And you can sense it when you have it, but a lot of people think that they have it. A lot of leaders will look around their team and think that people feel safe because what they will see is artificial harmony, right, Egbe?
Right,
yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So a lot of leaders, and I think we've both probably experienced this in our corporate careers, a lot of people think they've got great connection across the team and really high trust and really quite like really sound performance. A lot of organizations actually think, so if you ask them, if you ask them to look at Bruce Tuckman's stages of team development or Susan Whelan's integrated model of group development, a lot of people would say that they're at that performing stage, they're at that high performance level. But actually, without genuine trust, so vulnerability-based trust or psychological safety, you're actually a stage behind and you will never reach high performance, because high performance, when you have psych safety and trust, feels fluid. It feels seamless because you're in a learning organization. So when you have psych safety and the vulnerability, you can lean in, you learn. So your team effectiveness, your team efficacy goes up. The ability for the team to learn, for the organization to learn and adapt is amplified significantly. And that's what impacts performance. And the problem that we have is that leaders often look at performance and forget the preconditions that actually enable that performance to occur.
So Teresa, how do you think we can ignite organizations and leaders to understand the importance of psychological safety and trust, and to shift the way they, going back to Egbe's, it's around systems, processes, and people, but to shift the way they lead by understanding the impact. What is it that do you think that we can do to help wake leaders up to that? And then what do leaders need to do?
So one of the first things I do when I'm working with groups and workshops is to ask them what changes for them. How do they know when they're feeling psychologically safe? And how do they know when they're not? And what changes in their thinking and in their behavior? And then I send them into breakout groups and they think about it. And the last time I did this, I had people coming back into the room talking about the fact that when they don't feel psychologically safe, they feel like they're a different version of themselves. And leaders experience this just as much as anyone else, right? You'll work with a leadership team and they will admit to you one-on-one, or if you create a safe environment, they'll admit to each other that there are things that they're not saying around, in their team because they don't feel safe enough to be vulnerable. They feel like there's going to be judgment. And so they actually, so the first way to get people to get leaders to understand the impact of psych safety is to get them to remember what it feels like. Because once they can tap into that felt experience that they've had, and then you say to them, great, now think about every member on your team. Think about you're leading 10 people as direct reports. You've got 100 people in your downline. Imagine that amplified by 100 and think about what that's doing to your business.
Yeah, there's someone who I've worked with once before. I didn't actually feel there was much work to be done. It was quite incredible, but I hadn't experienced it to the extent I did with them. There was a small kind of entrepreneurial startup company focusing on technology. And there was something so tangible around psychological safety and trust that the level of output, creativity, innovation, performance, it was like sparkling, it was like tangible, it was so high to the extent that this small group of 7 people were bought out actually by Apple. They're now integrated into the Apple organization. It's really interesting what's happened since this core group came apart. But if you look at what made them so unique and such high performers, it was because of the environment that the leader had created. Going back to what you said in the beginning, that when you described what does psychological safety mean, and you said it's around that feeling an openness for whether you can have those discussions around the good or the bad. And that's exactly what was happening in this team. When anything good happened, there was the acknowledgement, the celebration. When anything not so good happened, it was like this huddle around, what can we learn from this? What can we do about this? So there was just this openness and safety to be in your truth, to learn from the mistakes, to celebrate successes. And they just kept spiraling up and up. Another conversation about what happened when this team was spread amongst other teams. They want to take their magic to others and some of the challenges. but it was the first time I really experienced this beauty of psychological safety and trust in a team that led to such high performance. And I suppose I still have that question, because I kind of get like in a workshop, and we're going to talk about that in a moment, also with our Lumina practitioners hat on, what is it that we can do very practically to enable and ignite it? But standing back in terms of both of your kind of your corporate knowledge and as your consultant hats on, what needs to happen? Egbe, maybe I can start with you around the system, to shift the system, to really wake people up. So not, even they may not even know they need a workshop, to ignite. How do we shift the system to really create that step change?
I love how you've used, Nicole, the term wake up, I think a couple of times now. One of the sort of hashtags I use and I formed in the work that I do is hashtag awake to ourselves. Awake to ourselves. There's something beautiful, whether it's a system or a team or an individual, in that moment of realization about who we are and where we are, that allows magic to happen, or to use other words, more sort of mundane words, allows change to take place, right? It's a gift in a system when the system gets to the point, and organization, doesn't matter how it's big or small, where it can get to the point that it says, we need help. Right? This isn't working, we need help. That in itself is a gift. You don't find that often, especially in big corporates. And so when that's absent, what I would look for in the work that I do, whether I was in corporate or now out of it, is have the conversation through performance, if it's a performance-driven organization. So what's going on with performance? How are you performing? And what's interesting is you can have a conversation about supposedly high performance where the numbers are concerned, but then when you expand that performance conversation to talk about the behaviors that back that up, then the sort of cracks start to show. So that's one entry point into saying, is this the kind of place where we can talk about what we're doing well and what we're not doing well? And are we up to putting in the work, right? Doing the effort that it takes to shift so that we're doing even better at what we do, and then we can sort of have the real conversation about, okay, let's look at what we're not doing well. What are we up for? So that's one entry point into the system. But where you have, on the other hand, a system that already puts its hand up and says, this isn't working, help us, that's amazing. Because then the conversation is, great, what isn't working? Or even a better conversation, so what's working really well? And how do you notice that, again, that isn't working and what's causing that? It's not always psychological safety, by the way, that's the issue, but it's a sort of way of getting into the system, being curious about it. So there's this sense of being awake to ourselves. There's also this realization that psychological safety is not easy as an input. The outcome is that it creates ease in the system, right? But ease and easy are not the same thing. And so there's sometimes this expectation, especially from senior management, that, oh no, so-and-so can come and talk to me, so we're psychologically safe. Well, maybe that individual has the courage muscle, right? Has built that courage muscle to come and have the conversation. It's not a proxy for the system and what's going on in the system. So the other thing to pay attention to is how individuals show up versus what the common experience is across the system, and starting to get leaders seeing the difference between what an individual experiences versus what the systemic experience is. And if one or two people can come with you with courage, it means they've built that muscle, right? It doesn't mean that it's a proxy for the system as a whole. So that's what I'll say is that it requires courage, psychological safety, and just being curious about how courage sits in the system is interesting. Perhaps the last point I'll add before maybe the conversation moves on is also noting whether a system, a relationship, because results are driven by relationships, right? And relationships are held in conversation. Noticing the conversations that are had, not just about how we celebrate, but how we mourn. In my experience, systems that don't create space for mourning when we don't get things right, and have the systems that don't have rituals for mourning, coming and saying, oh, we really wanted that. We really put our all in for that pitch or that proposal. We didn't get it. How can we learn from that? So when a system doesn't have space for mourning, but it has space for celebration. That's also a cue to perhaps it's not safe to talk about the things we're not good at here. So those are 3 things. Are we awake to ourselves? Is the system ready for shift? Are we building a systemic muscle of ease, knowing that it's not easy? And then what are the rituals, right, for learning, whether we get things right or we get things wrong within that system? Those are things to be curious about as a practitioner.
Thank you. Think about it. Okay. And so, Teresa, just following from that, what's your view about really enabling this systemic change? Is it from the top down? What's your view around creating an organization?
My view is it has to start at the leadership level. And that is, I think, one of the hardest things, right? Because we've been telling leaders for decades that they've got to have all the answers. And I feel like we've created this false harbor for leaders where we're telling them they've got to have all the answers. And we are now in a time in the world that there is so much ambiguity, uncertainty, volatility. I mean, we are like VUCA is very real for everyone right now, right? And so we've conditioned leaders to hold this place in their roles that actually is untenable, because it's not possible to have all the answers. And part of the value in teams is that you have this collective intelligence that you can mine. And so we've essentially put this burden on leaders' roles that they've got to create psychological safety, that they've got to, look after for performance, that they've got to have all the answers. And it's simply not true. And I love what Egbe was saying earlier around psychological safety creates ease in the system, but it's not easy. And part of the reason is because it's an individual construct, right? I feel psychologically safe in a different way than Egbe will, in a different way than you will, Nicole. And that's part of why Lumina becomes such an incredible tool to use to help people understand who they are, how they're showing up, who they want to be, like how they show up as individuals normally when they're relaxed, how they show up when they're trying to adapt to the world around them, and how they show up when they are faced with sudden change or when they're under pressure, because that's when you get people to really appreciate what being human really looks like. And actually, and so it starts from the point of leaders, to my mind and my experience, leaders sit at the heart of everything. Because the system doesn't tell leaders what to do. The leaders create the system, and leaders have a role, depending on their seniority, obviously. But leaders hold a role of influence and authority and agency and advocacy. And so you've really got to win the leadership teams over, the senior leadership teams over, to say, guys, what is your legacy going to be? Like, how do you? So as practitioners, we've got to be able to work with them and say, what kind of leader were you pre the pandemic? What kind of leader do you feel you became through the pandemic, and where do you want to go as a leader? Because we've all been through such a phenomenal amount of change, and it has been damned painful for a lot of us, and still is, and we're not there yet. So how do we release ourselves from this expectation of always having the answers, of always being right, when actually what we can do is talk to each other and find out? And one of the things that always surprises me, and it surprised me a lot when I was practicing in London, how excited heads of OD would get about their engagement surveys if they got more than 70%, response rate. And all I could think was, oh my goodness, the 30% of your staff didn't even care enough to let you know. You know what I mean? So I'm just sitting there going, I'm really confused. You're excited that not even 3/4 of your, and I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it, because all I could think was this missing 30%. And all I kind of wanted to say, and maybe my courage muscle wasn't there yet, Egbe, but I wanted to say, wow, how much are you paying that 30% that aren't engaging? You know what I mean? And what other impact are they having? So to my mind, leaders sit at the heart of this, but we need to help leaders transform their own thinking and their own view of what their role is, because the way that we lead, the way that we manage is still largely based on the production model, the Industrial Revolution. It's not based on who we are now and what is required now. We have to have a different understanding around what what great performance looks like and what it takes to unlock great performance. Because what we're learning through the great resignation and the great realignment is that people are realizing that actually this is my life I'm talking about here. You know, my employer hires me for my time. It's a trade-off. My life and my experience and knowledge for the money to support my life. So people are now waking up and going, there's got to be a deeper connection with this organization. And I think Egbe would relate to this is, you know, we talk about relationships, right? Like organizations don't create trust and psychological safety, relationships do. You feel psychologically safe in a relationship or you don't. You feel psychologically so, but those relationships can exist. So we can feel psychologically safe in different teams, in different environments, on different projects, depending on what's going on for us in our lives. But we need to understand that through our own eyes first and what that feels like and looks like for us before we can reach out to other people, which is why I think we need to do work with leaders first. But we've got to help them understand they don't need to be perfect. The time for perfection has passed. It's all about fluidity and learning and being able to lean on each other, because there is no one amongst us has all the answers. And if we did, we wouldn't need to be a part of a team. You know, but if we're talking about, you know, like we need each other to learn from each other and to be able to adapt quickly and to play to each other's strengths and support each other through the weaknesses and things. And so yeah, I think if we can gain the ears of leaders and help them change the way that they lead, so that they're leading in a more organic way that understands that that humans essentially only have two modes of operation, and that's connect or protect. Right. And when we're fearful, when we don't feel psychologically safe, we protect. And that's an energy shutdown. That's a withholding. It's a quietness. It's withdrawal. You know, we need to create. So all leaders need to do really is to understand that their role in this is to create an environment where they can recognize what psychological safety looks like in someone. So they recognize protective versus connective behaviors. And then they can either engage in conversation or you know, if a space can't be made safe, they can, you know, pause a conversation and come back to it, but recognize that actually things aren't comfortable, and therefore we'll revisit it. Or what can I do to make things comfortable? But leaders, it's not a leader's role to make someone feel psychologically safe. It's a leader's role to create an environment where psychological safety can happen.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Gosh, there's so many gems there. Thank you, Teresa. And just to go back to one thing you said, which is very just practical around where does one start? The initiative of the wake up, the big wake up. And you mentioned about the engagement survey and 70%, but what happens to the other 30%? I love that concept of it's brilliant. But that's a very practical way of really just, you know, touching into or touch base into the organization around what is the energy level, what's really exists here, and then using that as a base to then say, okay, what is the impact? How does this actually impact your bottom line? What's the impact on productivity, performance, motivation, you know, all those? And I'm sure those are things that are also very measurable, actually. Sorry, did you want to say something on that?
No, I was just going to say there are a lot of hidden costs. So one of the things that makes psychological safety tricky when you're talking about psych safety with regards to performance is that it's not a line item on your P&L, on your profit and loss, right? So if you can see it as a line item, you can't avoid it because you've got to report on it, right? So you know, if we're talking about a visible cost, then that's easy to discuss with people, and because people want to you know, limit costs. But psych safety is like disengagement. It's hard, it's a cost, absolutely, but it's a hidden cost. There are ways to measure it. So you can look at things like, well, if we've only got a 70% response rate in our engagement surveys, then 30% of our workforce is missing. They're not even willing to show up to tell us what they think. So they are actively disengaged. So, and then you can look at the responses that you've got, but if you take that 30% active disengagement and average the salaries and extrapolate it out, you can start to work out the cost to your business that's having in terms of productivity lag.
Yeah,
I mean, So there is actually a cost, but you come at the measurement slightly differently than if it were a solid visible line item.
I'm just wondering, because I think that would raise its attention if one could have, if it could be, as you said, a line item. But for example, absenteeism is something that could be measured, sick days, the employee assistant programs and measures around how many people are, we know that mental health is so vulnerable right now. They say what 1 in 4 people, I'm sure it's even higher now. I mean, there's lots of terrible stats going on out there, but I think maybe we need to work harder in actually creating real clarity around the impacts on bottom line, as a way of also waking up leadership to see this is something that cannot be ignored. It's critical, not just to the health, physical, mental, emotional health of your employees, but actually to your existence and your bottom line and your survival. And you say you don't know what you don't know. You think you're doing well because you're getting these perhaps profits coming in now, but what else is available to you if you have everybody spiraling upwards and working together, as you said so beautifully about the collaboration, the support, the moving away from perfectionism to agility. You mentioned about the organic nature of leaders, the understanding of, are we in protection or are we in connection? I mean, all these things are just beautiful, I suppose, even formulas that we can help them see that this isn't just a nice to have, let's be curious. This is actually critical in terms of,
Nicole, I'm smiling. Sorry, Teresa. Do you want to go ahead? Yeah, I'm smiling because most of all my corporate life, actually, I worked with engineers and accountants, different kinds of engineers. And I'm smiling because the sort of analyst in me is saying, these are nice conversations when we're speaking amongst ourselves because we get it. The challenge of a concept like psychological safety in reducing it to numbers, right, is that you can't make direct correlations. And to the point Teresa made earlier, because we're still very much in that Ford mechanistic way of working, everyone's looking for a linear correlation. Like, don't tell me that a lack of psychological safety has caused this because you can't prove it. So I would say we need to be cautious about going to businesses, especially sort of more traditional businesses, and saying this is absenteeism is caused by a lack of psychological safety. We simply can't prove a causal line. What we can do is talk about what the opportunity it will bring. What opportunities will it bring if it were present? I think that might be a stronger conversation, especially for some teams more than others, to be honest, if you were sort of trying to get an entry point into a business. So what's the cost, for example, of a lack of psychological safety on innovation and on your ability to innovate? So this idea of spiraling upwards that you were talking about, the pace of innovation, the ability to sort of catch up with your peers. Anyway, I don't want to belabor the point. It's just to say we have to be careful as practitioners coming into this space and the language we use, because if you can't prove a direct causal link, find another way to have the conversation. Otherwise, we might be shut out of the conversation. Yeah, the opportunity like that. I want to also say that I 100% agree with you, Teresa, is that we've set up leaders to fail, in that we've told them you have to know everything, be everything, and do everything. And perhaps the invitation for leaders in this new world or in this emerging world is very much what the coach does, and very much what we do as Lumina practitioners is hold up the mirror, create space, make the invitation a compelling one. Because psychological safety is an individually experienced thing, it's very tricky to extrapolate it to the whole. You almost have to do it one person at a time. And so the leader accelerates that by genuinely showing up as human, right, in the first place, and connecting with others through their humanity, because it's about holding on. I'm a leader and I'm responsible for this, I'm accountable, but also letting go. Make the invitation and people will take it or not take it. So perhaps the more compelling question is, as a leader, what are you inviting your teams to? what experience are you inviting them to? What way of being are you inviting them to? And how are you backing that up with the systems, with the culture in the organization, with the artifacts, with how you reward performance, with how you reward success? Because if you say you're inviting people to a space that's psychologically open, but the reward is not tied to that invitation, people will see through you. And they the opposite of what you're saying, because your reward is not matched up. So I think those are the kinds of conversations we can start to have, is how are you backing up your intent with reward, with opportunity for greater work, with your wellness offers. You were talking about wellness and mental health, Nicole. Those might be other compelling ways we can open the conversation.
So my final question to both of you is, the audience are many Lumina practitioners who are perhaps asking the question, very practically, once I have a group of leaders in a session who are open, that we have their listening, are there any practical processes, exercises that they could leverage the Lumina material to really enable greater psychological safety and trust? So from your wealth of experience, even just a few things you could share. So Teresa, can I start with you?
Damn, I thought you were going to ask Egbe first. Okay. So I always start with Lumina Spark, because it's honestly, to my mind, when you're talking about the paradox of being human, when you're talking about the complexity, the way that our behavior evolves, the way that we adapt ourselves, I think Lumina is the single best psychometric tool to help people actually understand what it really means to be human. So I always start with that when I'm working with leaders, if I can, because once you help them to see themselves really clearly and as fallible human beings with strengths, potential blind spots and things like that, then you get to have a different level of conversation with them. So that is an amazing starting point always. When I'm working with a leadership group and you get them to stand around a mat or to look at the mat, and you talk and you just ask them, what do you notice? How do you think this is showing up in your conversations? So asking them a few pointed questions, and we can certainly send you some questions after this, so that you've got some questions to share with practitioners as well. But one of the other things that I like to ask leadership teams is, I like to ask them to write down two things. If you knew that this entire team, if you believed that the entire team had your back and was invested in your success because you are part of this team, what would you tell them that they do really, really well? And what would you tell them to help them be a better member of the team? What advice would you give them? So that, because and think of it from a perspective of, you're not going to fail on my watch. I want you to be the very best team member you can be. And I've had grown men cry when they give each other the feedback. Grown men have known each other for a decade or two. And I think there is something really powerful about just actually realizing that you have each other's back. So, because essentially, if we're asking people to be vulnerable, we've got to give it, it's really helpful to give them a sense of that vulnerability, but we've got to create the safety before we invite them to be vulnerable. So that's one thing it's kind of a caveat. Use your facilitation of Lumina Spark with individual leaders and then as a leadership group to help them understand the messiness and the beauty and the complexity of being human. And then, talk about so a really good question to ask is, what does the future of this organization require from you guys as a leadership team? Who do you need to be able to lead the team, your teams and the organization into its next phase of growth and development? And if you could give each other one piece of feedback around what they're doing well and one piece of feedback you'd give them to help them do even better, because you really want them to be successful and you guys want to come out of this as this incredibly hard performing team, what would you say? And so that's kind of where I'd start with them, because once they've felt that sense of, wow, I can, these people actually do care. Because that's the thing as well, is when you feel, it's one thing to invite people to be vulnerable, but when they realize that other people actually see them as a human being and do care, and often we care about the people that we work with more than we realize we do, because a lot of our work eventually, for better or worse, often we get sucked into being quite operational in our work. So everything becomes quite transactional. We're just trying to get things done. And that sometimes kind of draws us away from that human connection piece, where we realize actually, hey, that person's really good at, so, Egbe's really good at this and Nicole's really good at that. And wow, I learn from them. I really value that. I'm a better person for being in their space, because when you can start to see each other more clearly like that, then the connection, that sense of connection and being a part of something bigger than just yourself, that's what starts to build the sense of psychological safety in this group, because it's not just about you, it's about what you're creating collectively together. But we've got to give them a sense of what that feels like.
Yeah, thank you. Amazing. Egbe, so for you,
everything Teresa said, I underscore. I would have said very much the same. Just to build on that, I'll start with the mat work, because also there's something magical about mat work. It's the sense that mandala is almost like an equalizing field, right? It gives a lot of info. So I'm talking to practitioners now. Notice how the energy goes up or down as people stand and step in different spaces on the mat. Notice what qualities are valued and maybe are less valued, and show that to the team, and just offer that as data to the team around, is every voice held with equal value and honor, or are there some voices, are there some positions, some qualities that are held with a little more honor than others? And open up a conversation around that. That conversation in itself is a lens into, is there psychological safety in this team? So in other words, are we comfortable to talk about why that is? If everyone wants to be like the boss who's a particular profile and they show up that way, it's an opportunity to have a conversation about projection versus connecting. Am I connecting to my real self, or am I projecting because that's what I think is currency to progression in this organization? So really rich conversation can happen at the mat level. Another one that I've used for a while and I brought into Lumina is the conversation when people get their spark and they read it, offer to them to share some of that with each other in the team. Excuse me, great question to ask, or great exercise to do is value I bring to the team. So simple exercise, ask people to look at their spark profile, identify the qualities that they think represent the value that they're adding to the team, and to take statements. So the beautiful thing about Spark, it doesn't just give the quality, but it gives statements. And then ask them to put that on a flip chart or online. It works well in person or online. And then it's a simple ABC. Everyone in the team has to go and just give 3 things. A, absolutely, I see it. B, I see it, but bring it on more. C, can't see it. Now, again, practitioner lens, pay attention to, do you get B's and C's, right? If everyone's an A, it's not possible, right? That everyone is absolutely bringing everything on all the time. We just know it's not normal that will happen in a human system. So have a conversation about where are the B's and C's, right? And B's and C's don't mean that we are broken. B's and C's just mean here are the areas we need to work on. So that's another lens through which you can sort of check, is there psychological safety in this team, to celebrate and to learn when we're not doing it right. And the third thing is one of the things I love about Lumina is the team view. What happens in the team when you look at that view and you look at the system, so that's the team, if you look at that bubble, and practitioners, you know what I'm talking about. How does that team show up when it's overextended, when it's performing, and when it's just being itself, versus how does the rest of the team show up? And have a real conversation about that, like, where do we go? Where do we go and why do we go there when we are in our overextended state or in our performing state? And when it looks completely different to who we are as individuals, what's going on? So those are, I think, conversations that could really open up opportunities to explore not just psychological safety, but other things that might be going on in that team from a practitioner perspective. Yeah.
Just magnificent, and just such a gift to be with you both and to hear your wisdom and applications. I'm going to just add something, I suppose, kind of the starting process for me that also gets to that point to be ready for these conversations that you're talking about, which are so rich. And something that I do is, before I start the session, is coach the leader who's going to set the context of the session and support them to be really vulnerable and authentic when they set the context. Because I often feel the level that they come into a group or their team is setting the tone.
I agree.
For the session.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And then from there, of course, the check-in is going to be critical. Questions like, what's it like to be you right now? You know, where you're at. So people feel they can be shared, they can share openly and be heard. And then the integration of our concepts of both Viktor Frankl, but also looking that we all stand on different mountaintops. There's no judgment here. And it's because of, you know, each and every person has their own unique purpose in this world, 8.5 billion of us. We are all different. So what we're going to use is this lens of color to cut through that complexity. And we're going to look for the commonalities that exist to help us. But the idea that we can use this lens of color to cut through that complexity and find ways to understand, what mountaintop are you standing on right now? How can I drop my judgment? Agree to disagree, but be in that place of curiosity to inquire, who are you? What's your worldview? Why do you see things in the way you do right now? And it's not personal, it's personality. So somehow part of the conversation of that continuum of behavior, no judgment, no right or wrong, just embracing that difference and valuing that difference, gives people the right to access their voice. And then we provide a safe language, whether it's through color. Egbe, I love what you said around the ABC, very safe but pertinent, to be able to just engage and say, it's all okay, you know, everything's okay, whatever it is, but let's understand, let's really be gracious with each other, and recognizing again, you know, that the complexity of being human and the messiness, as you were saying, Teresa. And we're all doing the best we can to survive and succeed. And we're going to mess up, and we're going to mess up often. But let's have positive unconditional regard. Let's look for good, and let's work how to navigate this world together. So I think that the Viktor Frankl about accessing the space in between and the mountaintops, and then we have our card game, whether it's virtual or whether it's on the mat, all these processes are very good at holding the space of taking them on that step-by-step journey. So then when they're ready to have those magnificent conversations that you both set up, the listening is ignited so that they can really, you know, optimize those. So it's just this beautiful work. It feels such important work. And I think especially now in today's world of just lack of certainty, insecurities, mental health, it just feels that everything is much more
fragile.
Fragile, thank you. Yeah, that's the word.
Excuse me, you triggered something for me. So I think one of the gifts that Lumina brings, and it can be quite subtle sometimes, is that it normalizes how we show up in context differently. And it normalizes that we all have bad days. So the overextended, overstressed, whatever that over is. It also normalizes that we don't live there. So we don't live in our overextended selves. We find ourselves there from time to time, but we don't live there. The gift that it gives to a system and the gift that it gives to teams and to individuals is that we can then be gracious about when someone's having a bad day and not label them bad, just label the day or the experience as bad. We can be curious ourselves as how much we shift in coming into our performing selves, and also how much, just to tie it back to the mental health, how much stress that might be putting on us, or ease that might be creating as we shift from our sort of core self to our performing self. So it's that gift of normalizing that we are different in different contexts, and that we have good days and we have not so good days. And so that common experience, that's the common human experience, I think is the gift that, another gift that Lumina brings in just helping us cope with what is very, it's a very, I wouldn't say troublous, but it sounds so negative. They're trying times, maybe I should say, that we find ourselves in. And so it's about the opportunity just to breathe, right? In the midst of that. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Beautifully put.
And Teresa, it goes back to your point then around the need of breath, but also of, you spoke about fluidity and the organic nature, because what we know is we don't know what's coming up next. So, yeah.
And I think we have to build on what Egbe was saying, this permission that we get through Lumina when we're having conversations with whole teams about Lumina, the way that it normalizes, the way that it allows you to realize that there is so much flexibility in our personalities. We are not, either this or that, and we're not always going to be either this or that. We are real organic beings who are fallible, and it equalizes the room, and it also creates a sense of vulnerability and trust. So I think Lumina is the one tool that allows you to have psychologically safe conversations, because that's what we're trained to create, right? We create this environment when we facilitate individually up front, and then we hold them in a room together and kind of walk them through it, and they get to see and understand how difference creates friction, but also this incredible kind of the spark of ingenuity and creativity. And so I think the beauty of being able to have these conversations with Lumina, and I love what Egbe was saying about, we don't live there. We have overextensions. We have, our performing selves. We have ourselves, in our natural state. We don't live in any one of those spaces. We can all move in and out, and we can label something negative. It's not being about us. It's about the experience. So I think the great value that Lumina gives us is the ability to help. It gives us a tool with which leaders can see themselves differently as human beings. They can see their team as human beings. They can recognize, what works and what doesn't, and why that might be. And we can start to then broaden up conversations to look at how they then create spaces, right, that are more psychologically safe, high trust, high performance, because these are all, in the knowledge economy, they're linked like that. They all reinforce each other. So yeah, it's I love what Egbe was saying before, and I love how you talk about it as well, Nicole. But
thank you.
But I think Lumina, we have a gift as Lumina practitioners to be able to walk people through this and use a tool that actually helps people to understand the beauty and the diversity and the complexity of life as a human being, and gives everyone permission to just be human. And it is not. Nothing is right or wrong. It just is.
And in that moment only, right? It shifts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, so thank you both so much. I think that's a beautiful place to bring this to a close, and just to thank you for your wisdom, for your time, and for the inspiration, and look forward to many more conversations with you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you both.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.